Welcome everyone, come on in, we'll get started in a minute. Well, hello everyone. People are still flowing in, so we'll give this a second, but welcome and thanks for joining us for today. This is, of course, Mac zooms in on the 2024 legislative session debrief, and we've got some special guests today, and we'll give it another minute, and then we'll get started. Good to see everyone too. Feel free to introduce yourselves in chat if you'd like to say hi and let us know who's in the room. Happy to see you all. I think it's probably a good time to get started. I know we'll have folks continue to flow in. Hi, I'm Laurel Hansen, Mac's Program and Member Engagement Manager, and I'm joined by my co-moderator, Clara Owen, who is Mac's Communications Director. We're pleased to be here with you today, as I mentioned, for the 2024 legislative session debrief. It's another one in Mac's Zoom sessions where we bring members together to convene around topics that matter to you. And while we know each of our members has a distinct voice in the community, we, as a network, we're united by the belief that we have a greater impact when we partner and collaborate. And on behalf of your network, thanks all for being here today. And as I mentioned, we have so many great MAC members here today. So many of our organizations are represented. Please feel free to introduce yourself in chat. We'd love to know who's in the room. And of course, I always like to add, if there's anything that you would like to zoom in on with your network, please drop us a note, an email or chat. Let us know what you'd like to Zoom about. Okay, so before we introduce our special guest, I'd just like to welcome Mac's VP of Member Advancement, Tricia Reinwald. She's just going to take a couple minutes to provide an update on some important work that the MAC network is doing around the Grants and Contract Reform Coalition. Hi, Tricia.
Hi, I'm just going to do a quick update. Those of you that joined us earlier this winter for our legislative preview session heard a little bit. A big part of Mac's job is about listening to members and really trying to spot trends, like things that are affecting all of the network, and looking for opportunities to work together on some of what our shared challenges are. So we've got a long history of collaborative work on challenges that we share with our business model and being human service nonprofits. And most MAC members partner with government to deliver programs and services. So most of the folks in the network have a pretty high percentage of revenue that's government funding. And so as a network, I think the last 3 to 5 years, we've heard a lot of concern about the growing complexity and the inequities that show up in government funding. And so that and our strategic framework, which we just rolled out this winter, is part of it is about recognizing how systemic racism shows up in the underinvestment and the overregulation of human service nonprofits. So we hear from all of you about the burdensome kind of bespoke compliance and reporting requirements, in addition to the challenge that we all face not having full cost coverage, which kind of leaves all of our organizations and our workforce really bearing a growing operational burden. And it's increasingly threatening organizational stability across the human services field, community-based nonprofits in general, And it really limits our ability to strengthen our community's well-being. So knowing this, we recognize this is part of MAC's focus and strategy and systems change work. We have been partnering alongside MCN and others in our field, kind of in the early stages of developing a coalition to build a unified voice to really help shape the future of state funding for nonprofits. I think all of you are very familiar with the headwinds we're facing and the conversations and questions you and your organizations may be getting from policymakers related to the Feeding Our Future scandal. These problems are not going away overnight, and it's been a challenge for quite some time in our field, even absent that most recent scandal. So I just kind of wanted to just pop a quick update to say MAC is doing some work in this early stage of developing a coalition. We do think it's going to be important we have a unified voice around this. And this last 6 months or so, we've been hosting a series of listening sessions with nonprofit leaders and others kind of in our sector, former government leaders, folks that have a good objective eye on this too, just gathering some input and ideas about what building a coalition to do long-term work on grants and contract reform, what it's going to take, what it could look like, and some lessons learned from past efforts. So a couple key things we've learned so far, I just wanted to share at the top, of this conversation. The Office of Grants Management, many of you know there was a big push last year and some new funding to really build capacity of that office, which at one point was 1 or 2 staff people. Now it will be 8. It's been challenging to engage them in these last 6 months as they've been just trying to hire and build their own capacity. Also implementing a lot of new policy that was passed last legislative year. So we're cautiously optimistic, but Office of Grants Management is a key place we're going to be looking to engage into the future. It's been a little bit spotty in terms of their willingness and ability to engage with us. The other thing I'd mention, in case you're not aware, last year there was funding that was passed to conduct an implementation study to build one centralized state grants portal. Right now there are about 15 and some departments that have no portal. So this is also something MAC's going to be paying close attention to, and alongside MCN looking for opportunities to influence how that system might look and might work for us. I would say big key things we've been hearing, it's going to be really important that we highlight the solutions, the things that work really well for us, so that we can kind of say, this state agency over here has a really great practice. It is possible to engage stakeholders in the following ways. Can we replicate that? And so that is one thing we've heard loud and clear. There is a lot afoot around the country. I would say there's a growing network of folks that are doing contract reform in other states. So we're really going to be looking to lean on what folks are learning in other places around the country. And then also just looking at there's a ton of different equity and grant making kinds of initiatives over the last 10, 15, 20 years in Minnesota. So we need to understand what has been done and attempted and what worked and what didn't. This is not the first run at this, which is to say, I think another thing we have heard through these listening sessions, this is definitely a long haul. We have to be committed over the long haul and build some of the infrastructure that's going to take for a coalition to move and for us to move with a unified voice. And the other thing I think has stood out so far is that need to focus on 1 to 2 tangible reforms first. And so, there's a policy side of this coalition work. There is an organizing side of this, and sort of the third leg of the stool is really narrative and the kind of myths that are out there about us as nonprofits and human services and how we call them grants in Minnesota. Most of the time it's not a grant, it's a contract. And so just thinking about that charity myth and our relationship with government and kind of the PR aspects of that. So there's a lot of different folks starting to come together. We're trying to map out what this looks like. And I would say we're just at the beginning of this process. And so MAC members, you know, we have been on this journey for a while. We're going to continue on the path. And I would say expect some further updates and opportunities to engage as the year progresses. So just a quick update, just to say this work is underway and it's slow going, but really trying to design what all of the steps need to be to build a movement around this here. Want to keep you all up to date. Thanks so much.
Tricia. Thank you, Tricia. And if anyone wants to get involved or learn more about it, they can certainly reach out to Tricia at MAC. Appreciate your leadership on this. So I'm getting ready to introduce our special guest, the reason why you're all here today, but I do want to kick us off with a poll question. Just a quick question that you can respond to. It'll help set the stage for our speaker. So Clara, go ahead and launch the poll. Are you working on or seeking state money for capital investment projects? And that can be any or all types. And we'd just like to know, are you seeking money? Are you just thinking about it? Or are you not doing that right at this time? All right, thanks everyone for responding. Hopefully you can see the results. It's quite a mix. Some people are thinking about it, some are seeking, and a big chunk of you aren't at this time. All right, so now it's my pleasure to welcome our special guest, Amy Koch. We definitely have the right person with us today to provide this debrief. She's been a political strategist at Hylden Advocacy and Law for more than 5 years. And impressively, she was the first woman to serve as majority leader when she was in the Minnesota Senate. Amy's a great partner with MAC Network. She always brings the scoop, and she promised this time it's spicy. So we're excited to have you here. Please note that you will get Amy's slide deck and the Zoom recording in a follow-up email from MAC after the session. So, of course, you can, during her comments, you can share your questions in chat and your comments in chat, or raise your hand, and we're also going to save a little time at the end for Q&A. Welcome, Amy.
All right. Thank you so much, Laurel. Thank you for having me. And good afternoon, everyone here. I'm going to move mine down. There we go. That's a little better. Good to see you all again, and very happy to be here. So yeah, this session, I will have to say, never have we expended so much energy for so little in 5 months. It was a wild ride, really busy. And then in the end, I'm not 100% sure exactly what got done. But a couple things I'll highlight, and I want to emphasize what Tricia was saying. You know, last year was such a watershed year, and the funding itself has just not made it to the ground yet. It was, you know, historic amount of funding in a year when, I mean, just an example, I think I used this slide, the housing appropriation alone was $1 billion. Versus a typical $10 million allocation. So when you go from 10 million to $1 billion, you can imagine as an agency, like what that would do to you, right? So just think about that on the scale of government and all the hoops and everything that's going through. So, so I really appreciate the efforts that MAC has been making along with the nonprofit, the MCN, because the work is really just getting started on that. Now this year we'll start. I've got Danny Clifford with me running the slideshow. So Danny, from my staff, thank you so much. I'm going to touch a little bit about 2024. And then a little bit of a look ahead. And so feel free to ask questions, you know, in the chat as we go. And Laurel always kind of hollers them out for me if needed, or save them for the end. But okay, so let's get cooking on 2024. Started in February, and on top of the $17+ billion that was spent last year, there was actually about $2.5 to $3 billion of another projected surplus for this biennium. What happened is they passed the bills last year, July 1st, 2024 started the fiscal year, and the actual receipts were coming in over and above even those sunny projections. So that resulted in a surplus for this current biennium that we are in that ends June 30th of 2025. But on the out years, what kind of put a damper on even that money, one, it was largely one-time money. And I think we touched on that with a kind of a session kickoff. But also there was a deficit in the following biennium. Now, of course, that can resolve itself. Those are purely projections and they're fairly distant projections. But still, it really gave pause to most of the legislature, and especially after, the historic the year before, there was a real hesitancy to spend. In the end, they settled on a supplemental budget of about $512 million. And a good chunk of that was actually for a lawsuit to resolve. So it really ended up being around about $400 million additional dollars. And so these were the targets set along with, around $1.5 billion for general obligation bonds for capital investment. In the $512 million supplemental budget, there was about $40 million set aside for capital projects in cash. So just so they had 1.5 for the big general obligation bonding bill for capital investment, about 40 million in cash for that. And then they had whatever's left of that, 400 and some million for additional budget items. And then, as the session went on, you probably have heard in the news, and this had a big impact, of a state senator from Woodbury, DFL Senator, Senator Mitchell, who was arrested for felony burglary of her stepmother's home. She was arrested, and normally that would be kind of interesting news. Certainly a lot of people would be watching it, but in this, it had a huge impact on session because the House is, there's about 4-seat majority for the DFL House. So the Democrats have a 4-seat majority in the House. In the Senate, the DFL have a majority, but they have it by 1 seat, 34-33. And if there is a vote of 33-33, if someone's out sick or sitting in jail, there is no tiebreaker. Everything fails on a split vote in the Minnesota Senate. There's no president of the Senate to break it, or like on a national level, the vice president votes. There's nothing in the Constitution that allows for that. So basically, if anyone else had ended up getting busted, if a House GOPer or a House DFLer or even a Senate GOPer had gotten arrested, it wouldn't have impacted session in such a way. But a Senate DFLer sitting out makes the count 33-33. And that really threw things into kind of chaos. And actually the Senate was shut down for a week around that time. And things really devolved. And so unfortunately, there were some disagreements amongst leadership. I was really hoping that because you need Republican votes for the bonding bill anyway, that they could negotiate something where, they negotiated a little bit of these supplemental budgets and did a bonding bill and maybe some sports betting and got out of Dodge. But that is not what happened. There was no negotiation. There was no outreach to the Republicans, despite needing them for capital investment. And everything just everything just slowed down to nothing. And there was no negotiating really happening. The omnibus, each supplemental budget bill passed off the floors, but then they went into conference committees that basically didn't meet. And they would put out a conference committee report anyway, everything was sort of frozen and sitting. And in the end, in the last hour and a half or so, they pushed through a bill that was a combination. You see it on your screen there. They called it the tax mega omnibus bill that was a tax bill, a transportation bill, a higher ed bill, an energy bill, human services, health and human services, family paid medical leave. And I mean, I think there was trigger or straw purchase for guns in that bill. It had everything. And of course, they don't need Republicans to vote pass that because they had Senator Mitchell was still voting. So they passed that bill in with about 30 minutes to go in the session, 1,500 pages. No one had read it. And then as a result of that, any kind of negotiation on capital investment and everything just fell. I mean, it didn't exist, right? So it was, you saw a lot about like sort of the mess that was the end of session, but it wasn't just the yelling, right? It was sort of like this really kind of terrible way for, really several weeks that everything was conducted, just like no accountability, no transparency, super disappointing and super hard to follow the bills. So if you're still wondering if something you were watching got funded or put in the bill, you're not alone, because they're still digging through these bills to figure out what is exactly in that mega omnibus bill. So next question. Or next slide, sorry. One thing that was, and I know is very important to all of you, last year was passed Earned Sick and Safe Time and Paid Family Medical Leave. Earned Sick and Safe Time kicked in this year. Paid Family Medical Leave does not take effect until January of 2026. There were some changes to Earned Sick and Safe. They have updated some eligible uses for for Earned Sick and Safe. They've made some documentation, sort of some tweaks around the edges. But do know that they were including, I don't know if anybody here uses independent contractors, but they clarified the language on Earned Sick and Safe that if any person anticipated to work 80 hours or more in a year, but does not include independent contractors. So I'm not sure if anybody here uses independent contractors, but they are not included in Earned Sick and Safe. On the family medical leave, unfortunately, they had to boost the payroll premium rate to 0.88. Even though it has not been implemented yet, we're only a year in, they realized that this is going to be much more expensive than they even anticipated. So, there's the payroll tax, and then sort of like an experience rating. I'm trying to equate it to something for unemployment. There's a premium rate, and that has been boosted to 0.88%. Also, they also clarified, like, if you give other PTO, that paid leave benefits would begin during the employee's first week of leave. So now that this has been passed, I'm sure as employers, you're going to get notice on sort of these changes, but I wanted you to all just to, be aware. I know that this is, I imagine that there are many folks here that, want to make sure that folks are paid fairly. But we also know this is going to be a big number for your bottom line. And there are some additional changes made. Now, I will also say this, there's one more session before paid family medical leave goes into effect. They'll go into in early January of 2025. And there will be one more session to make some changes to this or to fix some things as needed for paid family medical leave. But just know that those things are moving forward and there were some changes, including an increase to the payroll premium rate. There we go. We've got the chaotic end of session. We already talked about Senator Nicole Mitchell and the mega omnibus bill. I'm sorry, it was 1,800 pages. I thought it was 1,500. Just a really difficult end of the session, and kind of just disappointing to see on all fronts. So, additionally, the Uber and Lyft, for folks that live in Minneapolis, but really around the state, that the city council passed some pretty controversial requirements for Uber and Lyft, but they were about fairness of pay. The governor, they had actually passed something last year that the governor vetoed on this. It was similar to what the city council did. As part of the chaos to the end of session, there had been no negotiations there'd been negotiations, but nothing resolved on this bill. But in the final day on Saturday, they were able to finalize the negotiation. And as a part of the transportation bill omnibus tax bill, they did pass some standard income requirements for Uber and Lyft, really the first in the country. So for folks that were concerned about what to do if those rideshare folks left that market, they are now not leaving the market. There was a compromise put together there and passed with all parties, and so Uber Lyft will stay in the metro area. Well, I mean, anywhere in the state. They were going to leave the whole state if Minneapolis didn't work out. So that was fixed. And as I said, not only the big capital investment bill, which would require Republican votes, but even that cash bonding bill that I talked about, the 40 million that had been set aside, it actually passed the House floor without actually not even some projects named, but just chunks of money set aside. It was really kind of a half-baked bill, but they tried to vote on in the Senate and tried to move it through in the last 2 minutes, and they did not get it done and voted on. So it did not pass. So even the cash portion of that did not pass. If you were in that, it did not make it through the process. All right, so current political landscape, we've already kind of touched on it. The Senate is 34-33. The Senate is not up for re-election this year. It is every 4 years for the Senate. However, there may be some special elections, and they are likely not going to happen on November on the day of election. Senator Kelly Morrison is running for Dean Phillips' seat, and so that would throw that. So if she wins, and it's likely that she will win, then that seat will be up for election with the Senate. As well as there's a big question on if Senator Mitchell is convicted, then she's not able to run and hold office. So we're kind of wait and see on that, but those would be specials. So that the Senate is not really up, but maybe up for a re-election. In the House, it is a very narrow margin, as you can see, 6. You really only need to flip 4 seats for the Republicans to flip control, and all of the House is up for re-election. So that also played, obviously, a role in what happened this year. Both houses are very narrowly divided, and should the House flip, I do not expect it to be by a large margin either. So we will continue to have kind of like that very closely narrow margins in both the House and likely the Senate. The governor and executive officers are not up for re-election. So the governor obviously would maintain, he's got another 2 years on his thumb. So there we talked a little bit about the House. We could talk about like what I think will happen. I think it's a little unknown right now whether the Republicans will recapture the House. A lot will depend on the national winds, and the national winds are blowing in all kinds of directions. So I think we'll wait and see on that. And then, as I said, we touched on Senator Mitchell and Senator Morrison's as potential seats for specials, but that's very unlikely that they would have to resign by June 8th, next week, for those to be a special election in the regular election period. So you've seen calls for Senator Mitchell to resign from the governor and Ken Martin. That's because they would prefer to have a special election during the normal election period. It gives them a better shot at holding that seat. However, I don't think for a minute Senator Mitchell's going to resign. So huge amount of retirements in the House. Look at these. So we already had a really historic turnover in the last election for the House, just a ton of new faces. And there are some really big names here resigning and so stepping down. You see Representative Jamie Becker Finn, Representative Hodan Hassan. I mean, Frank Hornstein has been in the House for a very long time. Pat Garofalo, 20+ year veteran of the House. Former Minority Leader Anu Brindley stepping down. Liz Olson, Chair of Finance, stepping down. So lots and lots of new faces. Again, expect no matter what happens or who has control, there's going to be a lot of new faces at the Minnesota House. Okay, so I will stop there and open up to questions. If there's some specifics that we don't have, we will definitely get back to you on very specifics. So let's, I guess I'll just open up and see where people want to go.
Yeah, that was a really interesting insight into what you observed and what you saw. And yeah, definitely raise your hand or throw a question in chat if you'd like to ask Amy a question. I'm just curious. How did it feel different this year than it did for the last session? I mean, it seemed like maybe at the last session there were some opportunities that MAC members really benefited from.
Yeah,
Will that come around again?
well, and there were some things like, for example, if you do substance use disorder treatment, there was a 3% increase in rates this year. There were let's see, for early childhood folks, just so you know, there was an additional 30 million put down on VPK. So if you work with the schools, that's through the schools, but if you do some contract with them, they're supposed to do some of that. There was 30 million additional for VPK. The other big chunk in the early childhood budget was money for the Department of Children, Youth and Family. Remember, we're starting that whole new agency. So timeline on that, Tiki Brown has been appointed the commissioner of the new Department of Children, Youth and Families. She officially begins on July 1st. So in the next month, we will have the new commission, the new agency set up. It's going to be a little bit, it's going to be from MDE, they're taking from HHS, like the departments are going to kind of move in. So I mean, we could do a whole thing just on that new department, but that'll start July 1st, 2024. For a year, the transition team, which also got funding this year, will work side by side with the new agency to sort of get the transition completed. So you're going to see bits and pieces moving over from different agencies into the new agency over the next year. And so that was probably one of the bigger things that happened. Trying to think of what else members, some workforce development, there was some there was some workforce money spent, but as you all know, that's kind of, there's the separate sort of workforce development fund that they can tap into. And so there was some appropriations, certainly not on the scale that we saw last year, but there were some folks that got some direct appropriations.
Yeah. Steve has a comment. How can you have a huge omnibus package voted on without ample time to review and edit?
I really was disappointed as a former senator and Senate Majority Leader. End of session can be a little messy, and sometimes there's a bill that you sort of have to allow some debate and then cut off debate and move on if people are sort of intentionally, stalling. However, I've never seen anything like this. And it wasn't just that big mega omnibus bill, but the conference committees where they go in and the House has their HHS bill, and then the Senate has their HHS bill. They met and got together in a conference committee, and they never had a meeting. They never had a meeting until they came out and said, here's the final bill. They never met. They never negotiated. No one ever got to no one ever talked about, oh, well, we like the Senate position on this, or we like this. Nobody ever got to testify. They had no meetings, never, not one. And and then that bill was just thrown into the big giant tax omnibus bill. So we never got even any debate on the floor about it. It really was something like I've never seen. And I really, really hope that it was an anomaly based on the whole cat burglar situation it shouldn't have, it still shouldn't have happened. Believe me, there's no excuse. They should have taken a step back and said, okay, let's all work together. Let's figure out what we can pass in the final 4 weeks. Let's get it done. And it just didn't happen. So
what are you advising the organizations that you work with to sort of prepare for the next session? Any sort of anticipation coming up for the next session? What do you see on the horizon?
Yeah, well, of course, the election watching in November is going to really have an impact on what happens, right? Will the trifecta hold for the DFL, or is the House going to flip to GOP? And really, right now, anybody who tells you they know, they don't know. It's a question mark, and it's very, very close. However, next year is a budget year. And now, because they did not get capital investment done, there's going to be a push to get capital investment done. There's actually the current chair, Sandy Pappas in the Senate, has made very clearly she really would like to do capital investment every year. She knows that the costs for your capital projects goes up exponentially every year. And so there's a real cost to not just organizations, but to the state by not doing that. Plus, without consistent funding, it's really hard to put state bonding a capital investment into your budget for a capital project if it's just so hit or miss, right? The last one that passed in 2023 was the first one in 3 years. So it was really hard to, like, how do you budget for that? How do you plan for that? And of course, we all know what was happening with building from 2020 to 2023. We all know what happened to building costs. So I think that there will be renewed pressure for bonding next year because there was not one passed. And then the other thing to watch in November is the November forecast, where we're going to get a little peek into what that budget. Remember, I said that there was a deficit in the out years. Well, in January, they're going to come back and they're going to be addressing those out years. They're not out years anymore. That budget will start. So they'll come back January of 2025, and that budget starts July 1st of 2025. So they have to get it resolved by June 30th of 2025. And if is that deficit going to hold? And I would argue we should be mindful if there's money and money to spend, but also be mindful if there's a deficit, because then where's the haircut coming? Where's the budget? What is going to be rejiggered in the budget? And so that's something else to keep an eye on. And so that will come out end of November, end of November. It's called the November forecast. Sometimes it comes out the first week of December. They will budget on the forecast from February, but November is going to give us a really important sneak peek. Trisha's got a question. It looks like.
Yeah. Trisha, in fact, we can just put you on speaker and go ahead and ask.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, election happens so late in the year. Session starts, is it in February? It starts, like, what's your advice? We know that there's such a vast, if there's not misperceptions, just a total lack of knowledge about how nonprofits partner with government and how government partners with nonprofits. And any advice for, like, just how to get in there quickly and get for members to get to know their legislators quickly post-election, particularly when we've got some roles turning over. What's your best advice?
Well, so it is a great opportunity. And it's also a great challenge, right? And so because there has been these years since 2020 of nonprofit, really taking a hit at the state capitol. I think that I would highly recommend finding out who your current legislator is and inviting them to coffee, inviting them to tour, inviting them for a visit, because they really need to understand that there are some outlying bad actors in kind of all areas, but all the good work that your organizations do just gets lost in that noise. And it's one of the saddest things that I see, because I know how hard you work. I know you put blood, sweat, and tears into everything on a shoestring budget, and that you are covering a lot of the costs that government doesn't cover anymore, right? You fill all the gaps. You are in the community. You are in the community and on the ground, and you're absolutely the linchpin to what gets done and taking care of community. So I think that it can never be said enough. And while there are a lot of new people coming in, and you kind of have to, figure out who's up for re-election, who's likely to win, but there's also just a lot of incumbents coming back, and there was a lot of new faces this last session. So find out who your state rep is and invite them for a tour, invite them for coffee. They're going to be in the districts. They're running. They want to know their constituencies. And it's a great opportunity to tell them about what you're doing specifically, but also sort of having that bigger, broad picture message as well. That would be great.
Yeah, that's great advice. I wonder if any of our members who are on today have had that experience. They'd be willing to share or comment about what they've done or how they've approached it. Opening the floor to folks if they wish to share.
And if you need any help, let us know. Let Trisha know, and she can pass it on, and we can figure out who your legislators are, and we can even help you make contact. So we're happy to do that.
Oh, I see Nancy Brady is on. She's raised her hand. Hey,
So I'm
Nancy.
happy to share that we actually got some funding last year, right? So in the 2023 session. But it really did have a lot to do with the tremendous support from the legislators that cover our district. We are very fortunate that Sandy Pappas is one of those, and Maria Issa is the other. So we have two incredibly enthusiastic, incredibly nonprofit favorable people. But I'm about to retire, like literally, well, many of you know that, but Friday is my last day. My successor already started, and she and I were in a meeting this morning, and she knew Maria Issa beforehand, but they're already talking about next year. And they're focused on food, housing, and youth, because that's what matters in the district. So not so much capital projects, but maybe appropriations. But I will say one thing that happened to us last time was we got a very large housing appropriation, but it couldn't pass the way that it was originally designed. So they put it through a program called FHPAP, and it was the same biennium, and FHPAP got renewed. And then what happened was that when the county decided our allocation, they used a committee process, and those people, that committee knew that we'd gotten the money from the state, and so they reduced our annual. So the money, having it go through FHPAP, and then having nonprofits fighting with each other over who gets what of the county allocations. I'm exaggerating on the fighting piece, but it didn't end up benefiting us. And we did hire an advocate, a legislative advocate, that gave us an incredibly wonderful rate and advocated hard for us for 2 years. That resulted in both our housing bill and our support for renovation of the Wellstone Center. So sorry, for those of you who don't know me, I'm at Neighborhood House in St. Paul. Anyway, that's our experience.
I appreciate your sharing that, and thank you for coming on camera, because I really did just want to also give you a shout out and a congratulations on your retirement, and a thank you from the MAC network for all that you've done, your partnership, your leadership. It's been significant, and it's really impacted so many of us in the organization. So congratulations.
Well,
makes me kind of teary.
Oh, well, thank you. I think Janet's going to be wonderful as well. I hope you all get to know her, and I appreciated being part of the MAC board. Was really eye-opening and educational. So I would encourage all of you here who maybe haven't thought about being on the MAC board to think about it. And there's a process and there's a way to get involved. But it's things like this where we had in our strategic framework for the entire decade that I was the president of Neighborhood House, that we were going to do some work on systems. And we just never could get the resources to pay to have our own staff that could help make the changes in the systems. So I think having an organization like MAC that is able to work collaboratively in the benefit of all of us makes an enormous difference, because for each of us to try to find the resources to do it on our own is extraordinarily challenging, especially in this environment where many of us are struggling just to do our basic jobs of what our organization is, which is often the volume of work we're needing to do is being impacted by the racist systems that exist that are creating the poverty.
Well, you said it, Nancy. Thank you so much for sharing, and again for all you've done. And I also want to thank Amy for her share today and for leading us through what happened in the session. That debrief is always so helpful, and we're always thrilled to have you to come back. We do have one other special guest today that we want to give a few minutes to before we wrap up. We were lucky to meet Elizabeth Ebot from the Department of Children, Youth, and Families recently, and this is a newly formed and transitioning department that's launching or has launched and has been developing and has been doing a lot of listening and work with their stakeholders, including MAC. So I invited Elizabeth to just jump on today before we wrap up to just give us a status update, because she has a big job that she's doing to bring this new department forward, and we know it impacts many MAC members. So it's important that we know what's going on, and we're happy that Elizabeth's here to give us the latest information. So let's take a few minutes with Elizabeth. Welcome, and thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Laurel. I am sharing my screen now, so you let me know if you cannot see it. But to maximize my time with you all, really appreciate these few minutes just to, as Laurel said, get you up to speed on where we are right now in the transition and in the transition to and creation of the soon-to-be Department of Children, Youth, and Families. We're less than 30 days from our launch. We launched July 1st of this year, so next month. And again, I'm our Assistant Transition Director for Engagement and Equity with the Implementation Office. I know I've shared this with the team before, but just giving us context again, our Implementation Office is housed within Minnesota Management and Budget. And we are the team that is working with our agency partners, all those impacted by this new agency whose programs are moving into the new agency, sort of leading these efforts to create the house in which the structure in which all of these programs, services, people, culture, mission, vision will ultimately live in starting this next month. So to remind ourselves what that whole vision is again, so we're taking a real whole family focus, pulling in programs across these four key areas on the right-hand side to really take an effort to both pull together programs focused on early investments, but also some of our downstream services to pull that into one agency, have a designated commissioner and executive leadership team. It's really driving policy and funding priorities across all the different program areas that are moving. So we're pulling together, of course, our early childhood programs, plus more, as you can see on the side. We're working through with our cross-agency teams, with all of the different teams impacted by this transition, not only in this year leading up to it, but certainly throughout the year of the transition, all with that undercutting goal of thinking about, okay, we've been seeing these historic disparities across region, across ethnicity and race, income. Really, how can we be more focused at the state level in our program and service delivery and supports for those who are providing these frontline services? What do we need to do to make sure that we're actually meeting those equitable outcomes that we're saying are so important to us? So as a reminder, these are the big program areas, the big buckets that are moving. We've got our Children and Family Services, a Department of Human Services, including all those listed. So think about our child care, child support, economic and assistance and supports division, our OEO, except for our housing and homelessness programs. And I'll get into that in a second. And then also the licensing and program integrity functions that support those. Moving over from DHS, we've got our Early Learning Services Division from Department of Education, except for Part B 619, which provides special education to children 3 to 5. That's going to stay. And then we've also got some of our juvenile justice programs coming from DPS. So our Juvenile Justice Advisory Committee, Youth Intervention Program Grant, Youth Justice Office, and what will be the Office of Restorative Practices upon actually it will be created at the point that it moves to the new agency. And then lastly, our Help Me Connect, one program from Department of Health is moving over. So breaking that down into that timeline of program transfer, it looks like this. We've got a big chunk coming in the month of July, our Children and Family Services, and then we say our central operating functions. That's like human resources, communication, compliance, those like core areas that support across all of the different program areas, functions that support across all the different program areas, as well as our Early Learning Services Division from MDE. Middle of the fiscal year is Help Me Connect in January. And then the remainder of those licensing program integrity functions are programs from DPS, And then the remaining central operating functions will move over. And just underscoring that throughout this transition, if there's any concerns with program or service disruption or interruption in any way, these can be paused, delayed, canceled as needed. That's built into the language of the statute. So as far as some new things to show you since the last time I was here, one great, wonderful announcement that we're so pleased about is that our first commissioner of the new agency will be current Assistant Commissioner for Children and Family Services at DHS, Tiki Brown. So she will assume this role as of July 1. And we're in the process right now of recruitment across these very key areas, our deputy commissioner, and then our 4 assistant commissioners in our early childhood, economic opportunity and youth services, our family well-being, and safety and permanency division. So as you can see in italics under each of these assistant commissioner divisions, these are existing names of programs and services that will live under these divisions. We will have a much more comprehensive, like robust org chart to share with all of you, but just this gives you an idea in the weeks to come. But this just gives you an idea of how we're organizing things to date. Another big piece, speaking of sort of a legislative debrief, is there were certainly things that were top of mind for us as such a session was ending. Key to those were as was requested by the governor, some key critical operating needs were funded, including an intergovernmental advisory council, which will be a regular convening between state, county partners, tribes, to again facilitate that coordination of front door service delivery between state and our local partners and our tribes. Funding for and policy language that requires the commissioner to designate someone to lead coordination for children with mental health needs within and disabilities within the agencies and across the agencies was included, as well as other just sort of necessary changes we needed to make to recodify statutes and things like that associated with these programs and services. And then also language that enables planned program transfers proposed by the administration, except, and that means all the different programs and services that we said we're moving. Great, we get to move those, except just due to some legislative concerns, we aren't transferring the housing and homelessness programs from OEO into the new agency. So those will not transfer. Then additionally, just to highlight some changes, inclusions for program and services areas that are related to DCYF, that will live in DCYF, funding to establish permanent federal summer EBT program was included, $10 million to start upgrading our SSIS system was included. There was funding for food banks and shelves, additionally establishing about 5,200 additional voluntary pre-kindergarten seats, and language that makes sure that all public pre-kindergarten programs have a sort of set standards and requirements. And then finally, some language that enables additional funds to support early learning scholarships, both in like implementation of those programs and other updates as needed. So those were some key areas that we were very excited about and grateful for through the process, and certainly being driven by the Walz administration with many of this funding included. And then lastly, I also wanted to note that I mentioned that recruitment. So we've been driving forward with recruitment across our executive leaders for the agency. I know you see a lot of closed on the right-hand side. There will be more positions to come, but this is sort of where our focus is right now, some of these key positions that need to be in place. So our team is in the process of recruitment, and for some, and you can sort of be looking forward in the next couple of weeks, certainly, to announcements around our positions and candidates for these positions. And then lastly, just to note that at the same time that we'll be transferring programs in the waves I described, we're also thinking about, we're moving, there's about 1,000 staff that when it's all said and done will live in DCYF. So we're really being thoughtful about the experience from the staff side as well, and making sure, as they're the ones that are running these programs on our behalf. And so really making sure that there's seamless transition in that too. So in addition to the programs moving in phases, we'll also have staff moving in phases, and they're notified in due time to prepare for those changes. We're continuing to work with our agency partners on all the necessary interagency agreements that we need to have in place around data sharing, information sharing, continuity of programs in that way, throughout the transition. We're also, people can expect communication going out to all of our external grantees who hold contracts, but transferring divisions and program areas to ensure continuity in those contracts. And then finally, our engagement, really, it'll be critical as we go forward as well. So that continues across all of our different outlets and our different communities and populations that we're tied to. And I think you can expect to see some changes certainly and who is showing up in those kinds of engagements as we have permanent staff coming into DCYF, and we're working on a very seamless transition of our engagement from the implementation office to our permanent team at DCYF. So with that being said, I really appreciate the time to share a few updates, and I think, Laurel, it'd be great, coming back maybe sometime in the fall as we've had some of these transitions take place and provide some further updates at that time.
Yeah, we'd love to meet with you again, and as things begin to move forward. We know you have a full plate. We're glad that you were able to come today because there really were a lot of updates. And if you would be so kind as to send me a copy of your slide deck with your contact info, we can share that with our members in our post-Zoom email. So that would be really helpful. Thank you.
I'll do that as soon as I get off the call. Thank you so much.
Thanks for being with us, and good luck with the rest of the transition.
Thank you. See you soon.
Yeah. Well, and so, yeah, thanks to Elizabeth, and thanks to our special guest, Amy Koch, for sharing her valuable knowledge when she is at the legislative session. She really gets the behind the scenes scoop. So we're glad that she was here with us today, and as well as the rest of the Hylden team. And thank you all as well for your participation and attendance today. And please watch for that post-Zoom email. We'll get that out as soon as possible this week, so you have all the resources and the recording at hand. And that brings us to the close of today's Zoom session. So thanks again. Be well and have a great day. Bye for now.